Now, for more on this, we're joined by Chen, Deputy Director of Macroeconomics and Research Fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, and Martin Redrado, who was President of the Central Bank of Argentina between 2004 and 2010. So welcome to the show, both of you. Let's start with a look at the expectations for the forum. What were they, and did they meet those expectations? Chen, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. I think before the summit, we already come up with the expectations that when the global leaders gather in Beijing, we are going to review what's happened in the past 3.5 years and what are going to be the next actions, the next steps. I think if you look at the joint communique, if you look at the list of accomplishments, of course, we met that accomplishment.
And Martin, what did you see as the key outcomes from the forum?
The key outcome is seeing China as a very active participant in willing to have a more integrated world, and in particularly from the Americas, what we see is the will of China to participate in the integration of the continent and in creating a more balanced relation among our countries and Asia. So it's a very positive outcome what we see, and clearly the challenge is how to implement, and going forward, how do we implement this very good initiative?
And Chen, we know that President Xi announced the second Belt and Road Forum will be coming up in 2019. What can we expect in terms of progress between now and then?
Well, I think if you look at what happened in the past 3.5 years, you will see that it's a transition of the OBOR from a concept to more solid measures. But in the next 2 years, since we already have this very first summit, I think the next stage of implementation will be more efficient and more fast. So in 2 years' time, if we are going to gather again in China, of course, what we review is not just the conceptual progress, but more on a solid basis, the progress in actual implementation of the projects on the ground, Rochelle.
And Martin, what about for emerging economies? What would you like to see progress-wise between now and the next forum?
Well, I think as it was said right now, the key challenge is right now to bring it into implementation, to look at the specific public works that are needed, not only in Asia, where clearly we see the focus of the program, but also in other areas of the world, in particular in the developing world. But we see that the key challenge is in the need to focus in roads, in bridges, in waterways, in how do we create a more integrated world for trade and in particular investment in our regions that are the most significant needs that we have in the future. And in particular, the thrust for infrastructure projects is another key answer for the need of jobs and taking people out of welfare. So the key right now is to select the key public works that will have a multiplier effect in our countries.
And Chen, what do you see as some of the key projects that we should really be watching for?
Okay. I think I agree with what Martin said generally. I think currently if you look at the actual situation in Asia, of course, we still have a very big demand for funding for further infrastructure projects. And this is exactly why China announced it will further invest 100 billion yuan into the Silk Road Fund. But I don't think that's adequate. So in the next stage, how you're going to make sure the financing channels are smooth and are open to the projects in Asian countries, how you are going to ensure there's stable currency systems, stable credit system, all these call for integration, collaboration and wisdom of countries along the Belt and Road.
And Martin, Chen mentioned this issue of needing perhaps more funding. Tell us about some of the other challenges or concerns that perhaps may arise as the Belt and Road Forum that perhaps needs to still be addressed.
Well, clearly what you need to bring in is other financing institutions to help to boost the program that China is putting forward. And in my view, the key challenge moving forward, and I'm glad that you had all the multilateral institutions working together with China and with other significant countries, is how do we bring in the guarantees of the multilateral institutions to bring in more money from the private sector, from international private funds that are critical in order to satisfy the infrastructure needs that we have in all of our countries. So I think that the way the program is designed is very good. The critical element is how do we bring more capital from the private sector in order to boost this in a sustainable way.
Now, the U.S. delegation decided to join the forum rather late, but here's what White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said on where ties with China stand. Let's take a listen.
I think there's a lot of areas that we are going to continue to work with China to develop a way forward. I think the relationship that the President established with President Xi down in Mar-a-Lago is continuing to pay dividends for our country. And whether it's this policy or trade or market access, we're going to continue to see all of those individuals from the President's cabinet that were down in Mar-a-Lago continue to work with their counterparts in China to find a path forward.
Now, we know there was some concern about protectionism around the world. So what's your take on perhaps the opportunities that the Belt and Road could really open up, especially for U.S. businesses? Chen, let's start with you.
Okay, I think the Obama administration has a very clear policy of rebalancing to China, to Asia, or pivot to Asia. But now, when the Trump steps into office, his China policy is not clear yet. But from the Chinese part, we are trying our best to convince the Americans to focus on the win-win situation economically, and we want to try our best to soothe its security worries. So I think after the Xi-Trump meeting last April, in April last month, I think there's already higher expectation that the U.S. will join the AIIB. I think the expectation is now already higher. So I think in the future, it can be expected that the U.S. will continue to play a big role in the Asia-Pacific. I think if the U.S. could, for example, open its investment markets to China, and the two countries can join hands in high-quality infrastructure projects, the future geometry of Asia will be better.
And thank you. And Martin, just quickly, what's your take?
My take is that we've seen a very positive U.S.-China meeting, that there is a good areas for cooperation and collaboration, and it's clear that the world relies on the G2, on the relationship between China and the U.S. and China, to create a more cooperative, a more integrated, and really create a path for sustainable growth. Obviously, the rest of the countries like us in Latin America will collaborate into this in terms of integrate and having always what we always see in China and its international relation: balance and equilibrium.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to leave it there. Chen of Renmin University of China, and Martin Redrado, former president of the Central Bank of Argentina.